Volunteers? It's a bit difficult to demonstrate that we want to have this working group when we have nobody that will take notes. All right, so we are a couple minutes over the hour at this point, so let's go ahead and get started. I put a link in the chat to the notes page. I do still need a note taker before we can get started. Seriously, nobody is willing to take minutes for this meeting.
D-Dub, could you take notes?
I can take them. This is Pam.
Pam?
Oh, thank you,
Thank
Pam.
you very much, Pam.
That would be great because I'm supposed to leave halfway through the meeting. But I'll make adjustments if I need to.
Okay. Thank you very much. There, as I indicated, there is a notes page already there, so anybody can jump in and add notes as we go. That would be very helpful. All right, so with that, we can go ahead and get started. This is a IETF meeting, official IETF meeting. This is the note well, which all of you will have seen before. Please remember to abide by all of its guidance and rules. And in particular, I'd like to encourage a positive and productive environment in today's meeting. With that, the first thing we have is the agenda bash. As a couple of reminders, this is a working group forming BOF. We had a short version of this BOF in Philadelphia, and this is a continuation of that discussion. We want to identify if there's a problem and what is the IETF going to do about this problem. We'll be asking some interim questions along the way. But the focus of this entire meeting is whether or not we need to form a working group or how we want to address the work in this space. This was the agenda that we laid out. Basically, why are we proposing to do the work? And then how do we propose to do it? And then a look at the proposed charter. And then finally, some proposed mechanics of different ways we could implement it, provided the previous three discussions get us to this point. Is there any agenda bashing? Nope. I've already said some of this. Actually, I think I've said all of this already. But this is sort of setting the stage for today. This is a working group forming BOF. We want to continue the discussion, focus on the why, the what, and the how of the problem. And also that we're not engineering the final solution today. We're really identifying whether there's a problem to be solved, if there's critical mass to solve that problem, and if there's already some solid ideas on how to solve the problem. But this is not the final solution. So with that, we're going to switch to some presenters. Let me pull up your slides. Presenter slides. Okay, and Jeremy and Mike will be talking to this.
All right, great. So you can probably jump right to the next slide, or the one after this. So one of the things that, reflecting after the Philadelphia BOF, as well as the discussion on the mailing list, one of the things that I myself realized is that the way that we framed this, we put a little too much emphasis on the key features that we're excited about that it enables. And we were approaching this from a feature-first sort of description of selective disclosure and unlinkability, which are very important features. But what the message we were trying to deliver kind of got lost in the discussion around just those features. And so I wanted to kind of reframe the discussion here based on what the fundamentals are of why we're doing this, and what, not just those couple features that it enables, but kind of the whole category of capabilities that come about from, introducing this new container format and new work. So obviously, Jose is our history here. The really key things that we love about Jose is that it's JSON and web friendly. It offers really good cryptographic agility, and there's some amount of vetting of the underlying algorithms that are included in it. The challenge is that Jose isn't really able to do today to represent the large category of zero knowledge proofs. And there's some fundamental reasons why. And you may not be familiar with how zero knowledge proofs work or what that is. I'll get into that a little bit more. But ultimately, almost all zero knowledge proof algorithms have a transform or a finalize. And they exist in multiple states. So there can be a state where there's some cryptographic agreement, and then that cryptographic agreement is modified or changed in some way, and it produces another cryptographic agreement that is then verifiable. And this transformation or modification of the agreement is something that is, in order to do that with existing Jose frameworks today, you'd have two decoupled pieces. And at the application layer, you'd have to figure out how to couple those distinct pieces together. So it's very, very challenging to try and represent that properly. They also, fundamental to most zero knowledge proofs is they have the ability to operate on a set of messages. So not just a single message that is being signed or encrypted. And that property is important because the proofs they generate are based on the set and the properties of individual things within the set. So there's a much richer set of possibilities when you're able to represent concepts cryptographically that are based on a list of messages as well as items within that list. And so those, again, that's something that's just not really feasible with the current Jose stack. And then the last thing is there's the Jose JWS, JWT, JWE. They have a very well-defined interface for how you hand the set of things to the algorithm and you get back something from the algorithm and then you package that into the container. And the ZKP algorithms have a lot more inputs. So they don't fit into just inputting a message and a key. They have a lot of, this prior cryptographic agreement that might have to go into it, a blinded value that might have to be unblinded in that process, a predicate proof statement that might need to be input into the process. So the diversity there is much larger, and there's just no way to constrain that into a conventional signing style interface. So these are some of the big things that people have faced in trying to come up with container formats to represent these set of algorithms. Next slide. So what are the zero knowledge proofs? For those, this is it's not even a 30,000 foot view. This is like trying to see the rings of Saturn without a telescope. This is very, very, very high level. It's well steeped in the academic world. And there is a lot of practical applications that have been around for a long time, but the interest in deploying these has increased significantly in the last few years due to the amount of focus on privacy and privacy use cases, as well as the capabilities of our compute are much greater now. And a lot of these ZKP algorithms require a lot more compute than the traditional signing and encryption. And so those two things have kind of come together to make it much easier to perform them, as well as the need for them increasing. But the academic backing has been there. We just haven't seen them a lot because of those other sort of constraints. There's a lot of different types too. When they say ZKP, there's a lot of different sort of sub families within there. A big one is proof of knowledge. Pairing cryptography is fundamentally one of the ZKP tools. Multi-party computation is enabled by ZKPs. Rings and threshold signatures are also a form of ZKP, as well as protecting witnesses. So these, while you say ZKP, you might have a preconceived notion that it's just a certain type of thing. There's a large body of work that has its own sort of identity that is still fundamentally fits within the ZKP umbrella. They also enable a lot of capabilities. So obviously we focused a lot on selective disclosure and unlinkability, but the ability to do predicate proofs and to do verifiable computation are other key things. And there's you can't possibly list them here, but there's a lot of composability around generating different types of proofs, a range proof combined with a proof of knowledge, combined with a membership set proof. Gives you a lot of tools to solve really complicated problems and still have cryptographic verifiability of the integrity of those. So today, people that have been deploying ZKPs, they've been doing their own containers, right? And those containers end up being very custom and very specific to the application, which limits their cryptographic agility, and it limits the flexibility for different applications that might want to leverage that same work. And you've seen this in the blockchain space, right? Their solutions are very blockchain specific. Privacy Pass is a great solution using ZKPs, but it's very specific to the, starting with the CAPTCHA and other similar very specific use cases on the web. AnonCreds is a very specific solution just for anonymous credentials. And we feel that there's a strong need here to step up and create a container format that enables that wider application adoption, as well as improving the cryptographic agility to be able to swap out different ZKB algorithms without replacing whole protocol infrastructure around them. Next slide. So some of them, you've heard of some of these maybe, but these are very popular ZKB algorithms that often have their own, container formats, their own application adoption that are one-offs. BBS has been adopted into the CFRG, which is wonderful. It's a very mature and well-studied, and there's a lot of wonderful work there. CL Signatures has been around for a very long time, has been deployed in IDEMICs and AnonCreds and other scenarios at fairly large scale. Mercurial Signatures is pretty new, but there's also a lot of evidence of a different approach here for how to be able to create malleable signatures. PS Signatures is very similar to BBS and CL Signatures. It's just another example of an algorithm that offers cryptographic agility, a different approach, but has the same fundamental sort of operands and inputs and outputs going on. ZK snarks are a bag of tools. There's a whole bunch of different ZK snark approaches. They can be combined into lots of these solutions, but there's no way to just grab one and use it as an application right now. Obviously, there's the privacy pass work has been is progressing well in the IETF already. Is also has it being widely deployed already. Schnorr has been well studied. Applied algebraic max are growing in popularity and have some applicability. And Peterson commitments are another sort of fundamental unit that you end up doing one-off custom things on top of versus having a good application exposure. Next slide. So in a nutshell, this is a great question asked by Richard Barnes, who unfortunately gave his regrets and couldn't be here today. But I wanted to answer this directly, and it is, we were almost giving the wrong message that JWP was about selective disclosure or just about unlinkability, and it's not really. The approach here of what we're trying to accomplish is you've got signatures which provide authenticity and integrity protection, encryption which offers confidentiality protection, JWP offers knowledge protection, and that's a different type of protection that doesn't exist in those other paradigms, where you're protecting some knowledge that you have, and you're offering information about that knowledge that you can verify without revealing the knowledge itself. And it's a whole, I really believe that the demand on the privacy and cryptography and identity world over the next decade plus is such that the trust we have today in third parties is going to be continually degraded. And the only real viable solution is to start to build infrastructure where you are the owner of and in control of some of those flows versus having to trust a third party. So the trust isn't as binary anymore as you can accomplish with signing and encryption. The trust needs to be multi-party, and you can only really tackle that problem space by having another tool that can protect knowledge as these items are flowing through more complex and privacy-sensitive applications. Next slide. So I think, Mike, you want to take this over?
Sure. So this work didn't come about in a vacuum. There's been a lot of interest in having a JSON representation for zero-knowledge proofs from a lot of parties. Notably, the W3C Verifiable Credentials 2.0 working group explicitly put a dependency on JSON web proofs in their charter. they want the IETF to do this work, and then they will use it to have a ZKP form of verifiable credentials using it. So there's an explicit liaison request from a W3C working group to the IETF out of respect for our cryptographic and security expertise, that we're the right place to do this work and they want it. Likewise, the Decentralized Identity Foundation also believes in this work and incubated the JSON Web Proofs specifications with a lot of discussion and pull requests and issues and the whole normal process to get it to the point that we felt like we had a good existence proof that there is a viable way to solve this problem. But then again, DIF explicitly decided to hand this over to the IETF out of respect for the CFRG, the Security Directorate, et cetera. And, we have a good track record in this space. So I appreciate the support from both of those organizations for doing this work. New since Philadelphia, the Cryptographic Forum Research Group in the IRTF adopted a draft by Tobias Looker, who's on the call, that will standardize the BLS zero-knowledge proof cryptography operations. So they're the crypto experts. We're not. None of us claim to be crypto experts. Jeremy understands some of this. That doesn't make him a cryptographer either. But there's a partnership potential here, which is they're doing the heavy lifting for the algorithms, recognizing that they're valuable. We can create the JSON-based container format, enabling the use of those algorithms that the IRTF has decided to take on as work items. And I know Tobias was having audio problems, but maybe a little later he can talk about that. So at this point, Jeremy and I are done with the first phase of our presentation, where we're talking about the problem to be solved. Later on, we'll talk about a potential solution, but I'd like to turn it over to the chairs and explicitly invite people who are in the BOF who are interested in doing this work to raise their hands and talk about why you're interested in the work. Thank you.
While I'm bringing the chair slides back up, Brent, do you want to start?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to chime in. My first IETF was Philadelphia. I went, expressly for the purpose of attending the BOF that we had on JWP there. I'm here as a representative of Avast, Norton, LifeLock, whatever the new company is going to be called. Even I don't know. But it is, our roadmap needs this. We need a container format. We desperately want one that is interoperable. We love that IETF has been a place where these formats have been constructed and produced in a way that's been eminently successful, and would hope to continue to support this because these capabilities do make up a significant part of the roadmap that I'm working on.
All right, thank you. Ori?
Hi, I'm Ori Steele, Transmute. I'm one of the editors in the W3C Verifiable Credentials working group, and I'm really excited about being able to do this work at IETF to help secure JSON knowledge. I think the framing is really excellent, and there was a question. There's two comments on that have gone to the list, within a few minutes of us starting this work, and one of them mentions, asking the question, how much of this is just like really specific to W3C verifiable credentials. And as Mike Jones noted, in our charter, we did point to this work and request that IETF engage in it. But I'd like to say that I'm really excited about using JSON web proofs for securing JSON that isn't a W3C verifiable credential. I think that JSON and CBOR need knowledge protection mechanisms that are capable of leveraging the advancements in cryptography that we've made over the years. It's not just non-reputable digital signatures and encryption anymore. There are new capabilities that we need to be able to leverage in envelope formats. And I'm really excited about applying JSON web proofs to use cases that aren't, just specific to the W3C, but I think there are a lot of use cases within the W3C that we would like to be able to build on top of these sets of technologies. And so I'm here to say, I'm really strongly supportive of the work. I've been engaged in the work at the Decentralized Identity Foundation, and also in this sort of aligning the work in the W3C as a whole. Plan to participate and review and comment on anything that needs it for this work item. And I think now is the time to do this work so that these technologies can be used as building blocks, and so that we don't perpetuate this sort of everyone builds their own custom container to solve this problem, because that has caused a lot of harm in the industry around applying advanced cryptography. And we have the opportunity to address that in a positive way here today. So really excited about the work. And thank you for organizing the BOF.
Michael, go ahead.
And yeah, likewise want to echo very similar support to both statements from Mike Jones, Ori, Brent. I'm with Measure.io. We utilize cryptography in terms of securing information and verifying information that we collect for open source intelligence reasons, primarily to deal with things like food supply chain and food security and items related to global disease spread. So we're applying this kind of technology to some pretty important problem sets. Additionally, alongside Ori, I am an editor for a number of items in the VC working group over at W3C, and I'm one of the co-chairs at the Community Credentials Group. And so when I hear Ori mention things like building blocks, right, these are the kinds of things I like to see that are helpful to us building additional standards that then extend into other areas, and it prevents people from going out and reinventing the wheel or building custom frameworks or containerization around these kinds of problems that really should be standardized. And because of the cryptographic nature of these items, needs to be standardized in the right place with input from actual professionals in cryptography, which to me means IETF. And, as someone at W3C that, works on items like data integrity and other things like that, I want to be pointing back to IETF's specs and RFCs wherever possible and where appropriate, and likewise with things like NIST, et cetera. So thanks so much.
Bias?
Sorry,
Bias,
can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Go ahead.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, so I just wanted to express similar support as Mike mentioned. I'm one of the co-authors on the BBS signature draft that was recently adopted as a work item in the CFRG. And I believe a container format like JWP that really recycles a lot of the clever design decisions that were foundational to Jose is a really strong direction to be able to create a general purpose representation format for algorithms such as BBS. So strong supporter of the work. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. The So we've heard a number of statements of support for the work. Do we have anybody who has any questions about the clarity of the problem or whether there is a problem here for the IETF to solve? Go ahead, Brian.
Looking back over the charter, it still is very much about selective disclosure and amicability. So to the extent that the problem is trying to be clear, I don't sense that it's even consistently stated between what we've talked about here and the charter text.
Brian, I hate to ask you to do this, but could you say that one more time because you broke up a bit for me?
Unlinkability and selective disclosure, and still says things that seem somewhat disingenuous, like selective disclosure is not possible in the current Jose formats. So to the extent that Jeremy's tried to sort of reframe the problem and make it clear here, the charter doesn't reflect that. Or the proposed charter, excuse me.
Okay, yeah, I heard it that time. So you're saying that the charter does not reflect the clarifications and framing that were presented here. All right, Mike?
Sure. You're right, Brian, that we haven't updated the draft charter with the clearer messages that Jeremy gave. We could do that. I mean, that said, the charter is focused on capabilities within knowledge protection. I think deliverables should be the same, but I'd be glad to revise the messages to be more in line with what's been said this morning.
John?
In fairness, I wanted to point out that Richard did have some skepticism on the list, Richard Barnes, around whether or not the entire endeavor is plausible. There was another person on the list who was initially asking questions about how this would be applied at higher levels, but in his final message said that he was, while he was skeptical of JWT-SD, that he thought after discussing it on the list, he thought that JWP should be chartered. At least that was my interpretation of his last message. So I think a lot of, this work group isn't defining isn't defining either the underlying algorithms or how these things will be used in upper level protocols, such as secure email transport or OAuth, etc. We're really focused on the container format. So I think if we can clarify some of that in the charter, that may, with the exception of Richard, that may satisfy people.
Okay. So Brian, do I see you in the queue again, or is that an old queue entry? I'm assuming it's an old queue entry, and I'll move to Mike.
Thank you, John, for bringing up the comments on the list. I wanted to say that not only did the person in the discussion, whose name I believe is something like Dasuke, agree that we should have a working group, he also made the point that if we have a working group, it should be Jose on list.
Okay. Is there anybody else who wants to speak in this set of questions? If not, I'm going to do a quick poll. And with the question here being, is there a problem for the IETF to solve? Now, I've never used this hands tool before, so we'll have to see. Or I guess I could ask is, well, I see you. Okay. So I believe I have successfully started a poll. So raise your hand if you believe there is a problem for the IETF to solve. And we're up to 16 answers, so give you a few more seconds to answer this. All right, I think we're pretty close. We're on 18, so last chance to answer your poll. So we'll end the session. So right. So there is a consensus within this meeting that there is a problem for the IETF to solve. So at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to Mike and Jeremy. Hold on a sec while I get your slides up. Presenter slides, share.
So it would be interesting to hear from the one person who explicitly did not raise their hand. So if that person wants to speak up, because I'd like to understand why they think we don't have a problem for the IETF to solve.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so does the person who did not raise their hand wish to make a statement? Oh, go ahead, Brian.
That was me partly struggling with the interface because I didn't know how to use it and wavering back between the two. But I take it back to not so much that there's not a problem for the IETF, but I don't think the problem's been clearly defined. At least I don't understand it, or there's a disconnect between the suggestion of the problem here and the proposal to solve it in the charter.
In the charter.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was all I was, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification, Brian. Double checking the chat. Okay, still not clearly defined. So with that, Mike and Jeremy, did you want to start again?
Yes. This is going to be a pretty quick section. Jump to the next slide. So this is just another quick kind of recap overview of the work that we've done to at least, find a path, to demonstrate that there is possible solutions here, that it's not untenable problem space in general. The drafts have been shared out that identify at least one of these possible solution space, and it's really just meant to be as a starting point. The fundamental capabilities of this JWP draft do support multi-message algorithms. So that's one of the sort of core architectural changes that diverges from the existing Jose specifications. And that really means that there's, in the same terminology, there's multiple payloads that are combined into one cryptographic envelope, and that operations can happen on those payloads individually, yet the envelope represents state about the entire set. So that introduces a lot more, possibilities of things you can do on top of it. It also supports unlinkability, and that's the ability to do this transform, to take one cryptographic statement and turn it into a different cryptographic statement that has additional properties provided by the algorithm, such as not being linkable to the previous statement, but still yet be verifiable. The algorithm interfaces that we started to kind of outline and how you do this do provide for some agility. So while we haven't yet fully defined, we've defined an interface for the original BBS draft, and it is still portable to the newest draft, which there has been a number of changes. So that algorithmic interface is, provides that level of agility. You can plug in different backend algorithms. We've also defined a couple sort of non-ZKP algorithms just to show that there's, again, that level of cryptographic agility there. And we really strove for that same level of simplicity and the familiar patterns. So that's really the thing we wanted to make it part of the Jose family and make it familiar to adopters of the existing Jose structures. The same type of header, payload, but plural, and then, signature or, encrypted envelope added at the end. We're trying to reuse parts of Jose. Like JWK doesn't really need to change fundamentally. It can be extended easily to support ZKP algorithms. But introducing changes only where they're really strictly required, but still kind of inheriting as much as possible. And again, these are all, these aren't intended to be final solutions. It's really just, here's a starting point that provides a viable path. On the next slide, I can show a very simple example that is very familiar looking. And it's just what a JWP would look like, given the drafts that we produced. You still have a protected header. It is protected from the issuer through the holder to the verifier. And you also have multiple payloads. And those are, there's only one sort of URL safe character that's sort of left in the alphabet available to us, and that is the tilde. And we use that tilde to separate the multiple payloads. And then the proof is added at the end where there would be a signature. And that proof value contains enough information in it, in like the BBS algorithm, to be able to verify each one of those payloads separately, as well as the protection of the header envelope as a total. That's really just, here's a possible, solution that does provide this multi-payload capability, the ability to use zero-knowledge proofs to generate information about these payloads, to be able to make a proof that is unlinkable to the previous proof, but still verifiable. And those, there's the ability to do predicate proofs on top of this as well. That are really just, you're not revealing one of those payloads, but you're including information about the payload in that proof statement. So that's kind of where we are today. and what we're hoping to use as a starting point if a working group should be formed.
Okay. John, you're in the queue.
Okay, so some clarifications. So these documents are ones that would be submitted for consideration to a working group should it be created. These are not, we're not accepting these as work items at this point in time. These are proposals that people have put together and could be accepted or not by the working group once it's instantiated. And I see various shakings, so everyone's clear on that. We're not at this point accepting these documents. These are informational as to the sorts of things that are likely to be submitted. Other people may have completely different ideas that they would submit. The other thing, just out of interest, in JWT-SD, they've had to essentially bodge together multiple objects to be able to get a selective disclosure property. Is one of the underlying things, just to clarify that and contrast the two, this enables you to do similar-ish things, but in a single framework without having to have multiple cryptographic objects that you kind of have to glue together at a different level, as they're doing with JWT-SD. Would that be a fair comparison?
Yeah, and I do think we have a slide on.
Okay.
Sure, next. This is a reminder that we're not here to bike set the actual solution, as Karen said at the beginning. Indeed, Jeremy talking about the JWP drafts are really to demonstrate an existence proof of the possibility of solving this. It's not to say that these are complete or immutable, or that even that they have to be the starting point. It's evidence to this BOF that the problem that there seemed to be consensus that we want to solve is solvable. Next. Roman had encouraged us to review a few of the key questions from the last BOF, and let's do that. There's just a few. Next. So one thread asked from the microphone in Philadelphia was, well, isn't JSON Web Signature and or JSON Web Token enough? This is a reprise from something Jeremy said earlier, but Jose is fundamentally unable to represent the zero-knowledge proof inputs and outputs. Most require an additional transform or finalization step. They operate on sets and not single messages. And the interface to zero-knowledge proof algorithms has more inputs than conventional signing algorithms. And the data structures that Jose provides, as much as I love them, doesn't have a representation for those inputs. So to the extent that we believe that we want to be able to have a container format for zero-knowledge proofs, our friends JWS and JWT are not enough. Next. So our second what about question is about SD-JOT, and there's fair comparisons between the work and some of the goals. As a reminder, the OAuth working group has adopted the selective disclosure JOT work. And this is a quote from the abstract. It specifies conventions for creating JSON Web Tokens document that support selective disclosure of JOT claim values, which is a noble thing. And it's work I support. Well, so isn't SD-JOT enough? It is enough for some use cases. It's not for others. It doesn't have or enable many of the rich properties that the zero-knowledge proof algorithms do, which is okay, but it doesn't get us to the goal that we've been talking about in the general case for this work. Next. This is for you, Kirsten. What about CBOR? And he raises his hand, very good. The working group could certainly choose to create a CBOR-based container. And indeed, creating a CBOR representation is included in the proposed charter. It was pointed out from the microphone, I forget who, in Philly, that JSON has more restrictions than CBOR. It has more trouble, for instance, representing binary data. Hence, we end up base 64 URL encoding things. So we're actually starting with the JSON-based container, realizing that CBOR being able to represent binary, and there's a lot of binary data in proofs and whatnot, should be easier. But I fully expect those two container formats to be parallel, and the same people will be working on both in hopefully a working group. Next.
So can I quickly respond
Sure.
to this? I think basically you're hitting the right points here. There is another complication in the Jose environment because you are trying to do the compact format as well, and we have already heard about how you are using tildes to actually introduce another layer of hierarchy there. And given that you're running out of your LCF characters, you will not be able to put in another level of hierarchy and so on. And just the nightmare scenario that I have in my mind that I think we should try to avoid is that we come up with a design that is so much wrapped around the limitations that we have talked about, that the actual information model that is behind this work is no longer easily visible. And I'd rather make sure that we have a clear information model, and that, of course, will be very easy to map to CBOR, and will need more work to map it to JSON and the compact representation. Then do something that is entirely designed around the limitations of JSON and Jose, and then do reverse engineering essentially to reconstruct the information model and do a CBOR representation. So to avoid that, I would probably try to do the CBOR representation at the same time, so we have a way to actually expose that information model that is visible in the CBOR representation.
I think that's good architectural advice, and something that, should we get a working group, I hope you'll be there to represent it, and I completely agree with you. I will say, as a piece of history, but also those of you who know the JWS and JWE specs realize that there's actually two serializations. There's the compact serialization, which is what's used by JOTS, but there's also the JSON serialization, which has additional capabilities, among others, being able to represent multiple signatures and what have you. And that came about because the working group wanted it. There's no magic here. It's the IETF. If a substantial portion of a working group wants a feature, we'll do the feature. And so I'm not prejudging how this comes out, but it is entirely possible that we will both have a compact serialization and a JSON serialization in the JSON-based representation, just like, in fact, Jose has both, help me for what it's called, sign 0 and sign 1 or sign 2, where one is optimized for a single signature and the other has an array of signatures. So even in Jose, where you can easily represent binary in CBOR, there were different optimization paths, and that could happen as well. I'm not, again, prejudging what we're going to do, but we may also learn from the history of the two working groups.
Okay. So at this point, we were in the open discussion on possible solutions. This is the list of questions that we wanted people to consider. And I would encourage people to go to the mic and speak to these. And if there's nobody at the mic, perhaps we would do, oh, that's a chat thing, not a.
Yeah, Karen, we should probably, we should maybe ask these questions as a poll or something for.
Well, so yeah, the idea was we would have some conversation and then we would craft the polls based on how the conversation went.
Or I guess we could frame it as, does anyone disagree that with like the first statement? Does
Right.
anyone think there's that existing IETF work adequately addresses the problem?
I mean, we can start doing specific poll questions and people can answer that way. In the planning meetings that we had about this, we talked about a couple of different options for questions based on what the conversation and questions were going to be. But at this point, we're not.
People seem to die.
Yeah, I see people. All right, so we're going to play with the tool. That'll be great. I don't think we need to do a poll on the first one. Is there agreement that existing IETF work does not address this problem? Is there anybody that disagrees with that statement?
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest, Karen. I'm not disagreeing with the statement as a process thing. There's a couple of things we're trying to answer. Let's just see if we read the question. If there is not objection, let's not use the poll tool. Let's just agree that there is consensus. If no one is speaking up.
Okay,
we should record consensus in the minutes on the particular question so that we memorialize it.
Right. So question one, is there anybody here that disagrees that existing work does not address this problem? Okay, I hear no disagreement. The second question then, is there enough work here for a working group in the IETF? So is there anybody who does not believe that there's enough work here for a working group in the IETF?
Mark, to justify a working group in the IETF.
Right, enough work to justify a working group in the IETF. So we agree that we don't currently have an answer and we agree that there is plenty of work to do. So the next one is not really a poll question. It was, are there, oh, wait, go ahead, Roman.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly that. The next question is not like the others. We might want to jump to the fourth question, which is there sufficient interest? Some folks have come to the mic to voice support kind of earlier. If others want to come to the mic to kind of add on, given what they've heard, that they are now more interested in that. And we might want to also, with that question, also do a poll if folks just don't want to say more, but are they interested in contributing?
Okay.
A poll of people that are willing to do work on this would probably clarify the issue.
I see. All right.
Are you willing to work on?
Right. So the last one is who is willing to participate in this work? Do we want we can just say it in the chat or come to the microphone. We don't need a show of hands tool, or do we want a show of hands tool?
Well, aren't they two questions? One is there interest in doing the work, and the other is a bit more commitment with who's going to do it.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the first question without the poll tool, and then the last one I'll ask with the show of hands tool, and that way we will have it in more accurate? Show of
Okay.
hands, please. Okay. So the first one is there, I think we can look at the chat and demonstrate that there's sufficient interest in doing this work. Is that okay, Roman?
Yeah.
All right. So, so the first question I'm going to ask is, who is willing to contribute to this work? And starting that now. Okay, we seem to have leveled out at 11 out of 21, 12 out of 21. Last chance. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end this session. Did I end it before we? I know it was at least 12.
Yeah. We got 13. 13 was
Okay.
the number. So that's more than half. I've seen worse.
And then the second question that Karsten asked us to ask is, who is willing to review this work? I'm guessing it's suspiciously the same set of people. Anybody else? Okay. So 13 raise their hands.
14. We got 14 on that one. One more person.
All right. So we have 14.
One more person figured out the tool.
Excellent. So that
16.
is the. Oh, was it 16 before I closed it?
Well, I'm still looking at it, and it says 16. So.
Okay. Oh, I might have closed it and not. Yeah, I didn't end the session. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Now it's closed. It topped out at 16 for the record.
Okay. So taking us back to this, to the slides, the next thing was the draft charter. So there is a draft charter that's up there. I think we've already heard today that it was not refined from with the refinement and scoping that Jeremy and Mike presented, the charter was not updated to reflect that. There were some minor edits since Philadelphia, one specifically to call out external collaborations, and that it no longer presumes Jose, and then we'll get to that a little bit later about whether we want to. So the poll question here, oh, I see lots of, just one, was going to be, are there any objections to using this charter as a starting point? And we can, make continuing edits if we wish. Go ahead, Mike.
I'm certainly willing to take the action item to revise the messaging in the introduction to the charter to better align with what Jeremy and I presented today. I don't think it changes the deliverables, but having the messaging be clearer is obviously great. And thank you, Brian, for suggesting that.
So I would like to, I'm jumping in kind of here in line. I would like to get as much consensus as kind of possible here. Could we do a little bit of double checking? I think we're hearing like we got to change the charter. Let's find out where. So can we get a quick consensus check? Do we have support for the deliverables as described? Would be helpful to know.
Yeah, is there an easy way for me to show the deliverables? let's see.
You could project that link.
Yeah, hold on one second. I think I can, if you give me a moment.
Or people could go there themselves.
Oh, that's true. That might be a little easier. Let me just stick the link again in the chat.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Oh, faster than me. So if looking at the deliverables, we have an informational document on use cases. We have a standards track document on why don't you all just read them, and then maybe we can go through them. Mike, are you still in the queue, or?
No, thank you. I'll take my hand down.
Okay. So with that, are there any comments on the deliverables as the starting point? Do we have consensus that this is the right set of deliverables?
Ask the "Are there any objections?" question and do a poll, maybe. Or Roman put a different question in the chat. Ask Romans.
Okay, so would you? All right, so here we go. Show of hands tool. Would you support chartering a working group around the deliverables in I don't know if I can put the whole link in. I guess I will figure this out. Oh, look at that. So, okay, Karsten would diddle the test vector a bit.
It's really a minor point, so I don't want to dwell on this. But we probably want to slice up the test vectors between different documents, and they may not all want them to go into RFCs, but they might go into wikis and so on. But that's really for the working group to decide how to fulfill this deliverable.
And we put the standard caveat in the draft charter, Karsten, which is the working group can satisfy multiple of these deliverables in a single document or divide them otherwise, and they'll still be considered satisfied. So we're explicitly saying, yeah, the working group decides how to slice and dice.
All right,
This is Peter St. Andre. I have a question. I noticed it talked about developing new algorithms. I think some clarity there with regard to the division of labor between CFRG and the proposed new Jose working group would be beneficial there. Like, who are algorithms going to be defined in both places? How's that going to work? So I think some clarity about that would be good.
If I may speak, it's the same as we did in Jose, I believe is the intent, that we will specify for the algorithms how their inputs and outputs are represented in the container format. We explicitly disclaim doing algorithm work. That's the province of the CFRG.
That's not what it says right now, though, Mike. It says standards tracks documents specifying new algorithms and algorithm identifiers. It makes it sound like the algorithm work is going to happen here. So I think some clarity would be helpful.
I would be glad to update that accordingly, and I believe there's text in the COSE charter that's approved that I could steal that says exactly that.
All right. Roman says, specifying is not inventing, but the distinction was not clear to me, at least.
I agree. We can clarify that using the text from Kaze.
Yep, small point.
Good point.
Okay. So we started a poll. We finished it. It had 14 that were in favor of using this as a starting point, the deliverables as a starting point. The two issues that we've identified is clarifying that we're not specifying new algorithms and clarifying the test vectors. Go ahead, Sean.
What was the second one, Karen?
It was Carson's test vector comment.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so this, I guess just a question as to, there's some language in here that talks a little bit about selective disclosure, a need for that regarding JWTs. I'm just wondering, is it at all appropriate to have language in here that acknowledges or talks about the work at SDJWT? It's just purely a question.
We do say that we're going to coordinate with that work in the statements in the last paragraph.
Indeed, sorry, Mike, I didn't get there yet. You're right.
That's fine. Good point.
That's our favorite kind of question, one that's already answered. Okay, so that's so that covers the deliverables. Do we want to ask the second question, Roman, on the top text, or do we want to ask for
Hi, so Karen, the question you're asking is, it looks like we have consensus modulo the edits we just discussed on the deliverables, and what you're asking is, okay, so if we have consensus there, do we want to ask the consensus question for the rest of the charter, given that we've already talked a little bit about where it needs to change and how it doesn't exactly align with some of the containerization stuff we opened here in the beginning? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you said break it down to like deliverables and then.
Right. Yeah. So what I was trying to do is get us incremental consensus. We can certainly ask the question: do you support kind of the charter as is? And from there, let's talk about what edits we would need to make.
Okay.
Because I'll personally say, I think we definitely need to make some edits before we kind of ship. Let's get a sense for the magnitude of that.
Okay. But I don't sense, is there anybody opposed to using what we have as a starting point and then talking about editing? I'm not sensing that there's anybody that feels that way, but let me clear the queue first. Sean?
Sorry, that was it was still up. Moving on.
Oh, that was from before. Okay. And John, are you?
Oh.
Did you want? Okay. Okay. All right, Mike, you were. Is it just your microphone's on? Okay. So going back to the charter, then I'm sensing that there's no objections to using this as a starting point. We've done a little bit of wordsmithing on the deliverables. So moving backwards, can we identify some additional things that specific edits we want to make?
As I said earlier, but for the record, I'm willing to revise the introductory text to align with what we've done today in the presentations.
Right. I want to make sure that people have a chance to, if there's anything else they'd like to identify while we have the time and the attention now. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, just since I've been the one harping on this, I don't want to hold over too much, but the main objection I have to it here is the representation as selective disclosure, data minimalization as a limitation that existing Jose formats cannot achieve. It's fine for that to be a end goal of this work, but I think it's disingenuous to call it a limitation of existing Jose JOT, particularly when we link to a document that attempts to do exactly that later on. So I would just for posterity like to see it.
I'm fine with that.
Does that make, yeah.
Can you put that in the chat so Pam can capture it in the minutes, maybe, Brian?
Sure.
Thank you.
So, Brian, let me just clarify this. So it's not so much the JWP work itself, it's the way that it's being phrased as, or implying that there are limitations on Jose as it stands. So we're slagging off Jose from.
Well, there are limitations for sure. It's just that the selective disclosure isn't an actual limitation, and it's in the charter now, and previously it's been used to sort of saying that because it's impossible to do, we have to have this new thing, and I'd like to see that taken out.
Well,
or rephrased such that it doesn't suggest that it's an impossibility.
So let me rephrase that slightly. Right? So selective disclosure, you can't do with a single JOT. You need to combine multiple objects and essentially do detached signatures. So you can't really do it entirely within a single JWT, which is probably a fairer way of putting it. Would you agree with that? Disagree? I mean, yes, you can add on enough stuff to do it, and I think the way that JWT selective disclosure is doing it is a clever way of doing it and works pretty well, but isn't entirely within JWS, a single JWS object.
You're right. It's not contained entirely within a single JWS object.
And I think that's perhaps the distinction, that JWT can't do that within a single cryptographic object, whereas JWP could.
Okay.
You can always add enough stuff onto JWT and JWS to do almost anything, but your interoperability and scalability are going to suffer as a result of that, because you have to keep adding new stuff on top.
Well, okay. I mean, it dates back to that. It was stated as a fundamental limitation, and you're right. SDWT is adding something to it, but it's adding an additional piece of data, and it's something that is being standardized, so it will be interoperable. It's not within a specific context of a JWS structure, but I guess it's sort of nitpicky. I was just looking for the charter introductory text to back off a little bit on its statements of limitation.
Okay, so Mike, do you think that we can capture that sense that what we're trying to do is be able to enable this within a single cryptographic object using the newer algorithms that can't be applied directly to JWS, or something that's a little bit less aggressive?
That's fine, or I can just redact the whole sentence. I don't think it's necessary.
That also works.
Okay.
It's audio.
Roman?
Yeah. So what Brian said speaks to me in one particular doubt that, well, not a doubt, but a remark that I'd like to make. I think there's no doubt that the work needs to be done to achieve interoperable containment of zero knowledge proofs. The thing that I believe could be better expanded in the charter or somewhere else is the layering, as in why does this thing need to live at the JWP level? Technically, all the observation about, yes, JWTSD is adding a layer on top are correct, but the point is, I think we should clarify why that is not ideal, desirable. Let's say that in the past, JWS and like all the various crypto components that we added on top of JSON were all very nicely composable, and the reasons for composing them are obvious. In here, it's not entirely obvious. It's a new problem. So I think that if we spend some time hinting at the advantages of being able to layer this thing at this low level, at the like one single cryptographic component, it might be useful. Because right now, if I were to explain to a customer why that makes a difference, I don't think that I'd be well equipped to do so.
So I think that's a valid point. I think that's an extension of the argument that was made earlier, that we don't want different container formats for each cryptographic algorithm, which causes things not to be composable.
Okay. Roman?
Yeah, I'm next in the queue here. Yeah, I just want to stress, I don't think we need to insert all our design thinking kind of into this document and do a substantial compare and contrast of what you can do now, what you can't do. Let's just assert around the simple primitives of we want that container format. We can talk at least at the surface about the motivation for that, but let's be positive about this is what we want to do in extending Jose, because everything else seems like this whole design kind of conversation that a future working group can decide. I mean, a lot of complexity in the charter, I think, is not going to help us. Let's work backwards from the deliverables we have agreement on.
All right, so simplification of some of the background material at the beginning of the charter.
What I'm hearing are kind of objections, or I'm putting words in people's mouth. Maybe that's too strong to say kind of objections, but kind of concern around how we're framing existing kind of technology and what's in the art and kind of what's not in the art. And there might be some controversy there. So let's not have that controversy. If we agree that we need the container format for zero knowledge proofs, let's focus on the positive, that we want this kind of extension to do the following thing. And implicit in that is we've already done the discussion and the thinking about why the other things can't support what we're talking about here.
Okay. I think Brian's point is pretty clear that he's basically looking to tone down statements that are not quite accurate. Are there any other comments about the charter? Draft charter, excuse me, draft charter. So at this stage, without doing a poll, I believe we have consensus to use this as a draft charter, and we have some edits to make. Mike has agreed to make those edits. And I guess we will have a small window for any further suggestions. Go ahead, Raman.
I was going to follow up kind of after you. Please finish. I don't mean to interrupt.
Oh, I was just going to say Mike has agreed to make those changes, and then I was going to talk about time frame, but I'm not sure what the time frame is. But I do note that Tony Nadlin has joined the queue. So go ahead, Tony. You join the queue again. I think you're trying to share documents instead of speak. and now you're offline. So I'll wait for you to come back. All right, so is there any more discussion that we would like to have on the charter today? John, I see.
So to summarize this, we would make these edits, and people are okay with this draft charter being presented to a working group once it's instantiated to be considered as its draft charter.
Let me be a little more precise.
Okay.
I think there, John. I think what we've agreed to is we have the momentum, at least coming out of this meeting, to go to a working group. We've agreed that deliverables are almost correct. There's going to be some wordsmithing, and I think we've agreed that there's some wordsmithing that has to happen on the preamble. We're going to take that and put that into kind of a package. It's going to be, draft charter dash kind of 04 out of GitHub. When Mike has done kind of the necessary edits that we just agreed to here, I will put it into the data tracker. After I put it in the data tracker, with your help, John and Karen, we're going to put it to the Jose list, and we're going to say, listen, we had some consensus coming out of the BOF. We want to double check the consensus first to make sure we include folks that couldn't participate in this BOF, and to double check that the edits were made reflect the conversation we have here. We'll put a call out and a call for kind of confirmation that this is what we have, and then we'll move on from there. And that may mean more edits. That may mean it's ready to go to the ISG.
Okay, so the next step is making the edits and getting consensus from the mailing list.
That's right.
Excellent.
Okay, so then the last chunk of things that we had was the question about, once we got the charter settled, if there was any objections to using either the Jose mailing list or for the working group being Jose. Go ahead, Mike.
I don't have anything to say unless there's objections.
Oh, no, you just unmuted, so I assumed you were getting ready to say something.
So I will say that everybody who's interested is currently on the Jose mailing list, and changing it would probably be at least some inconvenience.
Okay.
So we should find out if anybody has a good reason not to reuse the Jose mailing list. And the name of the working group is sort of independent. We could always use a mailing list name that doesn't reflect the group that's happened, the work group name that's happened before. So the first question is, does anybody object to using the existing mailing list, to which we all seem to be subscribed? I'm just being lazy, so that's sort of my default position.
All right.
I mean, just very kind of practical to make sure we have kind of clear consensus. Is the call is there objections to continue using Jose if we end up with kind of a working group? If so, please please drop it in the chat or come up to the mic.
Given that we have to send the charter to the mailing list, knowing what mailing list we're going to do is sort of intertwined.
Yes, I guess question one for me would be, are there objections to using the mailing list? I haven't heard any from this group. Okay. So then the second question is there any objections to the working group being Jose?
Or being called Jose, or I don't know.
Being called Jose. I mean,
Sorry, I want to be just precise here. It's not calling it Jose. We'd actually be talking about reopening the Jose working, which kind of IETF process is a different beast, because we cannot actually create a new working group Jose. It's about reopening it or choosing a different name.
Okay, so we should be specific. We are either reopening Jose or picking a new name and opening a new working group, even though it's using the same, even though it's recycling the mailing list.
Correct. We have instances of all those kind of permutations.
Yeah. So does anyone object to us reopening the Jose working group for under this new proposed charter, or a proposed charter that will be adopted?
All right. So go ahead, Mike.
There being no objections, I therefore propose when I do the edits to remove the working group name TBD in the draft charter and call it Jose.
That would be a good thing.
Okay. I'll add that to my notes to do. Thank you.
Okay. So at this point, if there's no more discussion, I thank everybody for
I have
coming.
a logistical question. After I do the charter updates, which I plan to do this afternoon, do I send it to the chairs and the ADs? Do I send it to the mailing list?
I thought I heard you send it to the mailing list.
Well, why don't we do a quick check of Mike's edits and then send it to the mailing list? That shouldn't be too much of a speed bump.
Okay. Yeah, if the chairs could end up sending it to the mailing list, that has more stature.
So I would, I mean, that sounds great. I wanted to hop in here to talk about, what should we do in London? And the tee up for what should we do in London is a matter of kind of timelines and how much time we have between now and then. I looked at the calendar and to check the following thing, to remind everyone of IETF process. So when you want to charter a working group or reopen a working group, you get all of this consensus checking that we just talked about coming out of the BOF. It then goes to an IESG telechat for initial review. Then it goes to the community for at least 2 weeks or almost kind of 2 weeks. And then there's a return back to the IESG. At each one of those phases, there's a chance for any of those entities to have a conversation and want a resolution, kind of ask questions, potentially make changes. So the drill is IESG first time, community review 2 weeks, back to the IESG. And then if everything goes swimmingly, everyone nods very approvingly, a working group gets formed. So given where we are in the calendar, we're going to drop something onto the mailing list, and we're going to talk, we're going to talk about whether we have consensus to bring it to the IESG. At this point, there is not enough wall clock time to fully run through, assuming even if there's kind of wild agreement, to run through the IESG twice plus do an IETF call. So we cannot have a working group by London. So while there is an agenda time I held on the London for the London meeting, not knowing how this meeting was going to go or how the future community kind of goes, we are, kind of the bottom line is we're not going to have a working group. So there's going to be there's I think 2 options. If it turns out that all of the community discussion that we're about to have on the mailing list actually goes really easily, as in everyone goes, of course, I'm sorry I was not able to come to the BOF, but I wildly support that. I am going to cancel the London meeting because it just the time is too tight to kind of have for us to be in this prototype BOF state, because we'll be in flight then, and the charter will be the IESG. If it turns out that there is a lot of contention on the mailing list, and we do in fact need in-person time to talk about the charter, to advance it, we will kind of have that meeting. So we are in this kind of cautiously optimistic state to have time if we need it.
So, assuming things go well, are we obligated to relinquish the time? I mean, there could be reasons for us to get together and have a space still as a BOF. So I wouldn't
I am
necessarily.
uncomfortable. I am uncomfortable convening a BOF with all of the time pressures we have at the meeting for an activity that basically is with the ISG and the community chartering.
Right. I think given where we are, I think we either need to have what you're saying, Roman, or is it possible to have an unofficial side meeting to just do some planning about laying out the work, or is that unacceptable?
No, that sounds great.
Yeah, I think a side meeting, because of IETF process, that seems to make more sense to me.
Right.
So can we get some space and time allocated for a side meeting?
Yeah, well, you have to go through the standard side meeting wiki sign up,
Okay.
which we can do, and it opens on Friday, I believe. The wiki opens.
Okay.
Yeah, to be clear, I am holding the slot for us to convene in London officially. I will release the slot as soon as a charter goes to the IESG.
Right.
But we should also probably hold a side meeting slot as well, since it is going to open on Friday.
Yes.
And I know there's kind of a lot of contention for it. So we should be defensive here.
And to answer Brian's question, the side meeting can't use the BOF time and space because that's, yeah, no, it can't. It has to be. Thanks, Peter. Thanks for the notes.
Don't we have to have some different meet echo or something? Something crazy happens for side meetings.
Right. I mean, it's a little bit more complicated. I think it would be, but I mean, it's not fair to all the other groups, and you have to follow the process. Mm-hmm. So I think we can either.
So Karen and I should, or I should reserve a side meeting when it opens up on Friday so that we.
Right.
Allocate some space.
We might do a quick, check on the mailing list to see if there's any. So side meetings don't get Meet Echo support. There is possibilities for things like Zoom with audio. It's a little bit more complicated. But the other way to look at this is if we're having that official slot meeting in London that Roman has reserved, that means that we are still fighting consensus on getting something chartered, as opposed to it having gone to the IESG. So I would rather view this as the side meeting would mean we're further along in the process.
Yes.
Go ahead, Mike.
I withdraw.
Okay. Right, exactly.
But,
a side meeting is not a success.
Yeah, we're not going to. We should get early to reserve a side meeting, and if some reason we don't cancel the main meeting, then we can also always cancel the side meeting should things go horribly.
And we will try to get adequate support for the side meeting.
We should probably ask who's planning on attending in person so that we can get adequate space for said side meeting.
Right. So basically we have more planning to do. Is there anything else people would like to discuss today? Okay. Thank you again very much to Pam and Peter for taking notes. That is definitely appreciated. And with that, I believe we are done. Anything else, John?
No, thanks everyone for attending. Hopefully we'll see you in London. Not at an official meeting.
Thanks all.
Yeah. Thank you for a great meeting.
Ciao.